Hey there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from SpeechKids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we help little kids learn how to talk and help parents understand their little kids. And I am joined today by Carey Heller. Carey, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I'm excited to chat today.
Yeah, and before we dive in, just tell the good folks sort of a little bit about yourself, where you are, who you work with.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Carey Heller. I'm a clinical psychologist. I have a practice at Heller Psychology Group in Bethesda, Maryland. And with telehealth these days, I can see people in DC, Maryland, Virginia, and about 24 other states.
Thanks
I'm
to
not
these
gonna, I won't, I won't be, I'm
interstate
not going to take the time to name them all,
No.
but you can figure it out if you're in one of those other states. I specialize in ADHD and executive function issues. So I do formal testing as well as therapy and coaching, often blending traditional talk therapy with practical coaching. So helping kids with keeping track of assignments, planning out tasks, being able to follow through on chores. Lots of things that carry over both into school stuff and things outside of school. And I also run an executive functioning boot camp.
And I recently discovered that you are kind of rare actually in the field because you do testing and therapy. Do you find that to be true, or am I just coming from somewhere else?
That wasn't where I thought you were going with this.
No, we're going to jump into the other thing first, but you said something unexpected. And so that's why I wanted.
Yeah. So, certainly, there's some people that do both, but I think there are a lot of people that do one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The other thing that I think is sort of unusual about what I do is that I sort of blend therapy with coaching, because I think a lot of times it's most people, or mental health professionals do therapy, or you have coaches that only a small percentage of people that do formal coaching are also mental health professionals.
Yes.
And so I think that's where, because the way that I operate is from a holistic perspective. I feel like you have to kind of address the person as a whole. You can't look at stuff in isolation. So whether I'm addressing it all or I'm working collaboratively with people, which I'm always happy to do, I think in some shape or form, you have to address kind of the bigger issue that's going on, not just here's what you're seeing if they're having trouble with keeping track of assignments, for example.
Yes. Okay. So now we're going to zoom out and go to where we thought we were going, which was this notion that you have to look at the whole person in all of their environments, which is something that as siloed professionals, and I'm coming at it from a speech language pathology standpoint. You're coming at it from like a clinical psychology standpoint, originally speaking. And I think it's funny that both of us are now including a lot more coaching into our practices.
Yeah, we definitely have that similarity.
Yeah, because you have to look at the whole organism. So how does that play out for you?
I think in a lot of different ways. Because when I do testing, I'm taking a holistic look at as much as I'm able to as a psychologist. So certainly I'm looking at, cognitive functioning, processing speed, how well people can remember stuff. I'm also looking at language, for example, to some degree as much as I can, but I also realize there are times where, if I can start to identify, it seems like there's a language issue or some sort of speech issue, but in a lot of cases it would then be, I'm beyond kind of what's in my wheelhouse that is appropriate for me to do. And so then refer out to a speech and language pathologist because, there are times where I pick up whether it's that or sometimes auditory processing issues, so refer out to an audiologist. Or actually, one thing I think a lot of people don't think about, and I definitely credit developmental optometrists that I know for kind of giving me this knowledge, which helps a lot, but in terms of recognizing when vision issues pop up when I do testing, and then referring out for that, because that's something that a lot of people really don't think about. And that, for example, like when I see ADHD, in most cases, a vision issue is not going to completely mimic ADHD, but I've seen a lot of cases where sometimes if someone doesn't do a thorough evaluation, there could be that, misconstruing what it is, or more often, there's a vision issue co-occurring with ADHD, anxiety, or something else.
Right. And another one that gets, I agree with you on the vision, and developmental optometry gets bad rap or whatever it is. And I agree with you. Like, we got to be checking, like, can you scan, can you see, can you move through moving an environment where things are moving? Like, there's a lot of stuff that's happening that can make you look really wonky and can impede your function.
Right,
because your visual skills are not
right.
Well.
I think people think about I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was saying, that I think people think about vision more as, can you see, in front of you or read it? But that it's often, maybe people can do fine on that, but it's, as you were saying, how the eyes work together. Exactly. And that's where, people can get really stuck. And that even, can slow down processing speed too. If you're having to visually scan when you're reading something or read a question, then, go to a Scantron to bubble in stuff. If your eye tracking is not good, it's going to be hard to do that efficiently.
And then you look like you have ADHD, which you might also have.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing that gets overlooked a lot, I think, and one thing that certainly I'm always screening for because they go together with speech and language, is sensory issues.
Hmm.
So body regulation, proprioception, in other words, knowing where I end and the world begins, an internal sense, like, so that interoception, am I hungry? Am I tired? Do I need to use the bathroom? Like all of those. That sensory stuff really plays on behavior. And what's your experience with sensory and anxiety, actually? Because I'm super curious about this.
Sure. I mean, certainly, I mean, I see both quite a bit. I think in a lot of ways, if someone has sensory issues, because it impacts self-regulation, or oftentimes it can lead to increased anxiety. So, for example, I see kids where if they have a hard time with regulating or recognizing, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. On the one hand, sometimes that leads to more anxiety in situations about worrying about being in a situation where they have to go to the bathroom. So it's sort of strange because in general, with anxiety, sometimes, like, or I've seen this with ADHD too, where sometimes when someone's really anxious and they have ADHD, in some ways compensates. So there are times where they might also see better at stuff because they're so anxious, they're heightened, there's an increased sense of awareness to it.
Right.
So there's that piece of it, but at the same time, there's still maybe that being stuck. So, or even with the sensory piece, even if you're anxious and aware of it, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to regulate any better. It may even be worse.
Right. And it's funny, as you were saying that, I was like, that's really where the coaching comes in too, right? Which is like, okay, are you functional because you're hyper functioning? Or can we figure out how to get you like functioning and you're not like white knuckling it all the time, right?
Right, like functioning in a more pleasant way.
Right.
Because it's also like, you can think about it as, someone like, let's say, I mean, I see this a lot where if you base someone's academic performance just on like what the grades show on the school portal, what gets missed is, for example, some teachers are really good about letting you retake stuff or turn in stuff really late and get some credit. So sometimes the grades at the end of a quarter semester don't actually reflect what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what do I want to ask you? Like, what's your take on that? I mean, my catchphrase is always, this guy or girl is working harder than the average bear. Let's put some supports in place that are going to sort of help them not work so hard. And then hopefully kind of dive underneath what's happening so that we can get sort of smoother function in background, and then maybe performance doesn't even change at all. Like, where's your head at in terms of like, what's your...
No, I agree with that. I think it depends on, is there a need to change the performance? So if someone's doing well, but it's taking so much time behind the scenes, if they're, compromising sleep or other things because they're staying up late doing work, or it just is so mentally taxing that that's causing other issues. Like sometimes I'll see where kids kind of keep it together and are fine at school, but at home, they're really dysregulated because it takes so much to get through the school day. So being able to help them.
There are parents watching this who just had like a big light bulb moment. So I want to repeat it really slowly. There are kids probably living in your house, parents, who are holding it together during the school day. They are working really hard. And when they get home, it all falls apart. And that's why they're like jerks at home. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I really wanted to pause for that.
Oh, no worries. I agree. I think it's definitely an important point that I think people don't think about.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's this aspect of, because certainly from criteria for certain disorders, they're supposed to occur in multiple settings. And so I think sometimes there's this, sort of thought that, oh, my child is fine at school, there aren't any issues.
Right.
But I also think too, the other thing is, well, obviously you want to trust your, the child's teacher that, and maybe what they're seeing may say, oh, my child's fine, there are not issues. But, sometimes teachers certainly don't see everything. Yeah. Like, I don't know, I can think one example, goes back, I don't know, at least 8+ years at this point, but I just remember doing classroom observation for a teenager. And so I observed the teen, like they could not sit still at all in the class. This was also a class of like 30 something students. Okay. So understandably, it was probably hard for the teacher to see everything. And so, the teen could not sit still. And then I remember interviewing the teacher after, and the teacher was like, oh no, he can sit still fine. I don't see any issues with that at all.
She just, how did that happen? Like, how did that discrepancy happen?
I think discrepancy happened because I think that it was the kid was very nice, polite, quiet, wasn't disruptive. And I think the fidgeting was mostly, with the bottom half of the body. So I think based on where she's positioned in the class, like I could see it well because of how it's angled in the room. But I think based on her thing, looking sort of up at the board and at the other students, I think probably the bottom half was blocked. So he probably just never noticed it because, she probably wasn't focusing in great depth for any real period of time on one student.
So interesting.
So I don't think it was anything negative about the teacher. My point though is that a lot of times, sort of obviously when you look at each student as an individual, there's stuff that one person, when they're looking at like the class as a whole, are not always going to see everything.
You bring up another interesting, let's just take a diversion here because the client that you're talking about was a girl. Can you talk a little bit about how girls and boys maybe not are identified differently or how they present differently?
Yeah. I think certainly everyone should focus, you should always focus on how everyone presents as their own person. But I think anecdotally, I think certainly, while I've definitely interacted with, lots of, females with ADHD that are very hyperactive, more often, I think there's often this inattentive or kind of like flighty, just, sort of, characteristic in a lot of cases with ADHD. But I also think or sometimes there's, statistically, I don't know if maybe with ADHD there's more anxiety in girls or boys, but in general, I see anecdotally, I see a fair amount where I think sometimes ADHD gets misconstrued as anxiety, or it's there also, in girls in a different way than with boys.
Yeah.
And that's not entirely consistent by any means. And certainly there are definitely lots of anxious boys with ADHD, but I do think that like if you're going to focus on from like maybe more of a stereotype perspective, I do think that there's often, oftentimes I would see girls women getting diagnosed sort of at later ages. But I would say that too, even with boys that aren't hyperactive, that if it's more inattentive type of ADHD, I think a lot of times it's not as noticeable. Whereas the child who can't sit still and is bouncing off the walls, usually they're going to be identified more earlier on because they're disruptive and it's far more visible. Whereas sometimes when you're looking at someone, it's hard to tell, are they really focused on what they're doing in the moment or are they completely zoned out?
Right. And I think so I agree with you on that. Like in terms of like within males or female population, there's as much variability in there as there would be between groups. But I think you're right about the stereotypes and sort of how I think girls are definitely socialized to pick up and need to use those cues. And so they maybe are better able to mask in some ways than we expect boys to be able to. But I hear you. I think you're right on the research. Like there's variability across all of it.
Yeah. And I think also even, I know this is with boys too, but especially with girls, even the social piece that I think people don't really think about that a lot with ADHD, that, if you have a teen or child that can't focus well, oftentimes they're missing social cues, either visual one, just what someone says, so sometimes they may say things that make no sense because they didn't hear what someone else had said previously or didn't fully process it. And so then that can create issues with them being uncomfortable about social situations. Certainly there can be conflicts that arise or people feel like, oh, this person doesn't care, they're not paying attention.
Right. And that's really interesting, right? Because if we label that, and again, you and I think are on the same page in terms of like, let's get to the root of what's happening underneath and treat that. But if we look at, kid doesn't want to go out with a group of friends and we label that as social anxiety, we're missing the point completely, which is kid can't track a multi-person conversation. That's the thing that's the problem. Or kid can't remember what's being said to them when there's a lot of background noise, right? And so for all of those reasons, that child might prefer to just be with one person at home or be online playing a game with one person, right? And then you're really looking at a more complex photo sort of image versus like they have social anxiety. They don't want to be around a group of people. That's not it at all.
Right. And I think that's an important distinction, that when there's an avoidance of something, it doesn't always mean that they truly don't want to be. To your point, that a lot of times people have a strong interest in socializing, but they're too nervous to be able to do so.
Yeah, right. And there's something getting in the way. This is this whole, I don't know how much Ross Green, do you know Ross Green?
Yeah, I'm familiar with the work. Yeah.
Yeah. That whole children do well when they can. And if they can't, they're not going to do it. They're not stupid. I tell that to parents all the time. Your child is not dumb. They know where they're going to fail and they know where they can succeed. And which would you choose? Right.
Right. I think most kids are going to choose the one where they can succeed. Yeah. But, there are also times where some kids also get very nervous about like a sort of, they call it fears of success. So that's maybe not as common, but that still is definitely can be a big issue.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. Can you do you have a client in mind that where you like used your approach to kind of dig under and figure out, and can you walk us through that? I don't know, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit in terms of the plan, but
I mean, I would say maybe if I take, or in general, I like maybe kind of a mix of like maybe a couple, also be mindful of privacy as well.
absolutely.
Would be a situation where, maybe the referral question is, so-and-so can't keep track of their assignments, that they're constantly missing work, it's not getting done. So I meet with them, and so, first I get a sense of like, how do they keep track of assignments? So in a lot of cases, they have a school portal. So for anyone from Montgomery County public schools, they use Mises Classroom, which is, otherwise known as Canvas, because that's the company that makes the program. And so it puts the assignments in there, but I realize just because they're in there doesn't mean that they're going to magically get done. So then the next question is, do they look at the program to even see what they have to do? There's some kids that, look at it and then they think, oh, I'll remember to do this later and push it off. So like figuring out that one of the issues that comes into play is, having intention of doing it, but then forgetting it, or sometimes I'll see it's quite a bit where they start assignments, but then don't go back and finish them and forget about it. Because there's so much information you have to hold in your mind if you just look at the assignments in a platform when there's so much other information. Whereas there are times where, so forgetting it is obviously one reason that a child or teen may have trouble with getting assignments done. But another piece of it is the anxiety about getting started. Yeah. Like, especially with a paper, if it's, I don't know how to do this. This is really hard. I can't do this. I'm going to push it off. Yeah. Or I'm just not going to do it because I feel like I can't.
Yeah.
So like you have the same behavior of not doing the assignments, but there are very different reasons of why they may be occurring. Or, other situations where they legitimately don't have time. There's too many obligations with sports, other activities, and then, or sometimes family obligations. And when they get home, they're too tired to actually function to do the work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one. Bedtime is, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, right? Are they working so hard and it's taking so long that they are sacrificing sleep? Or is their schedule so packed that they don't have the time that they need in order to do the assignments? Or, are they waiting too late to start and then they're just, sort of running on empty? And it reminds me of my own kids, where we used to have, as a parent, I had what some people would consider insanely early bedtimes for my kids, but it meant that they were always up by themselves and ready for school in the morning. And sometimes they would be up early enough to get their assignments done in the morning. And that was something that worked in our house, but bedtime is crucial. Like, sleep actually directly impacts your brain.
Right, exactly. I think people don't think it, like, I always view sleep as this idea, like, think about like an appointment that you have to attend consistently. Whereas I think a lot of people, especially adults, focus on it as, once I'm done with everything, whatever time I've left, I'll sleep before I have to get up in the morning. Whereas that. Like, if you're going to focus on it as like an appointment you have to attend, it becomes more of an important thing that you can hopefully stick to more, as opposed to just the time left over after you do everything else.
I love that. Making an appointment that you have to keep with your sleep regimen. Yeah, that does really like shift the mindset there. That's really good.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely helps. I mean, I don't know. It's what I use myself with trying to make sure I get enough sleep. It's focusing on this idea of like having to be in bed by a certain time, because otherwise I definitely don't function as well if I don't get enough sleep.
Yeah.
But I see a lot of kids I work with that, I mean, if you take a kid and they haven't gotten enough sleep, I do testing, there's a good chance that in a lot of ways whatever their presentation may mimic ADHD just because they're so tired.
Right. Yeah, and there is some research, correct me if I'm wrong, that sleep deprivation like mimics, correlates with ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't directly cause ADHD, but it certainly, like, if you look at the symptom presentation, or like, for example, a continuous performance test is a computerized measure that's used like in conjunction with other things to look at, someone's ability to pay attention. But if you put someone that's sort of sleep deprived and have them do that versus someone with ADHD, probably, there might be some subtle differences. But, overall, you're probably going to get somewhat similar results as someone having a hard time focusing and responding as appropriately as they should be, because, the reaction time may be slower and inconsistent. Yeah. And so in general, plus like, not getting enough sleep over time, I mean, it can lead to, word finding difficulties and all sorts of other things that it just, you're not or even, poor decision making.
Right. Right. And so,
I mean, same thing with hunger is another piece of it too, that a lot of people don't think about is, I always think about the Snickers commercial. A kid or adult who just like sort of loses it when they're hungry. I
Yeah.
mean, not that Snickers is really the best thing to be eating when
I was about to
when
say
you're in
what?
you're in that mode, but or like hangry is another term I guess people sometimes use for it. But
Mhm.
this idea that not having food, and I see this too with certainly some kids are very sensitive to stimulant medication for ADHD and don't eat much when they're on it. So that in
Yeah.
itself, so even if they're not hungry, not having food during the day can impact functioning. Or also, especially with COVID, some kids are really uncomfortable, understandably, like taking off a mask to eat lunch. And so, especially in middle and high school students, I see some just really don't eat lunch because they don't want to be anywhere without a mask on.
Yeah. And so all of those things that we're just talking about, right? So sleep, eating, exercise is another one. Like, you know, kids generally, this is my opinion, don't get enough exercise, which can make them look like they're hyper. And really, it's just they're trying to get their yayas, like literally their bodily needs met. I always laugh. My mother used to send my brother before dinner to run around the house 10 times. Um, my brother is certainly, there's no doubt in my mind, he would have been diagnosed. He could have been diagnosed then in the late 70s, but certainly would be diagnosed now as having ADHD, which would have been, I think, not great for him, honestly, because with exercise and regular sleep and a good diet, he was fine and he wasn't working harder than the average bear, but he needed those things in place.
Right. So, and I think, I mean, for most kids, whether it's ADHD or not, they need physical activity, and especially kids, let's say maybe when you're 7 or 8, or even a little older than that sometimes. Sort of. I mean, the way most schools are set up is probably not conducive to the ideal amount of exercise and movement that kids need throughout the day.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to have a lot of kids, even if there's no ADHD, where it's they're wiggly and getting in each other's faces because they just need that extra stimulation, that increased movement more than they're getting during a typical school day.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about in Raising Orchid Kids, which is the parent support and education group that I run, is I often sort of prescribe a family walk or bike ride or some kind of exercise before school in the morning. Like if they can walk to school instead of drive, or if they can just get up, if everyone's up and has had enough sleep, if they can build in a 15-minute run around or trampoline or some kind of physical activity, because it just sets everybody up. Oof, sorry about the dog. Sets everybody up for success in a way that that really matters.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. I mean, one thing I also recommend, too, and this helps, like especially if the weather's not great or it's too cold or something like that, is even if you have you can set up stations like throughout like a living room or some other room, and you can get like a desk bike for like $25 on Amazon that you can set up. So you can, kind of just pedal in place, got like a balance board, other like little kind of workout stuff, and then create stations for your family to rotate through.
I love that, like a family obstacle course.
Yeah, exactly. And then this way
Yeah.
it sort of becomes fun, opportunity to kind of all get physical activity in the morning and can become part of routine. And then, maybe over time the kids replace it with, sort of more of like a typical workout routine when they get older, if they need that, if they're not getting that at other times during the day.
Exactly. Just for people who missed it, a desk bike is like a little set of pedals that rests on the floor, and then you put your feet on it and you can pedal while you sit at your desk.
Yeah.
It's kind of genius. My kids had a teacher in middle school who had a whole bunch of these kinds of tools for kids who wanted to move during class. And she was voted best teacher of the year several times. So
yeah, no, they're great. I mean, I have like a desk elliptical under my desk. I think I have a bike one. I did also try a Stairmaster one. That one does not work quite as well for sitting.
Okay.
I found, but
yep. Yeah, and then you're moving around while you're on the screen.
Yeah, but I mean, it's fascinating too, because I mean, certainly like before COVID, when I was seeing more people in person, sort of I had all this stuff in my office, and so kids would often use it during appointments, and then especially doing sessions online, a lot of kids, or at least some of the kids I work with over time, have like gotten the bike, so then they'll kind of do it during the session on their end.
That's awesome. Yeah. Carey, I'm going to wrap this, but we're going to have you back because I could sit here and talk to you all day. So for now, thank you for being here. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Probably the easiest thing is just my website, hellerpsychologygroup.com. There's a form on the bottom of the page. You can fill it out and send me an email, and I'll get it, and I'm happy to respond to you. There's a direct portal link there as well, so you can reach out and schedule time to chat with me. So I'm pretty easy to find if you put me into Google or just go to my website.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much, Carey.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for having me. This is fun.